Hey guys, so Stephen King-a-thon ended. That means I had a lot more time to catch up on some new releases, as well as some movies that are just on my watch list and I've been waiting to get to, and I figured now is as good a time as any. So in this video, I'll be talking about three movies I've seen recently. I watched The Last Duel, then I watched Antlers, and the third movie is going to be a surprise recommendation. It's not a recent release, it came out maybe 20 years ago, maybe a bit less. Anyway, we'll get to it while we get there. Let's start with The Last Duel. It's impossible to talk about The Last Duel without first addressing the controversy. That controversy being the rape controversy thing that's going on the internet that's utterly stupid. Anyway, let me just give you the premise of the movie because the premise wasn't made clear in the trailer. And I'm not really. These are all going to be spoiler reviews, by the way. All three of them, spoiler reviews. So this movie is basically about Matt Damon, Adam Driver, and a female character. I forget who's the actress who plays her. Anyway, the female is married to Matt Damon. Matt Damon is this brave warrior-like person. We think he's that anyway. Turns out, through other people's perspective, people view him as a bit of an egoistic kind of person and not as tough as he thinks he is. Anyway, this story is basically an event told through three different point of views, the three point of views that I mentioned, and it's basically about a rape. And the way Matt Damon perceives the rape is different from the way Adam Driver's character perceives the rape, is different from the way the female character perceives the rape, and all of that leads up to a duel. This movie was directed by Ridley Scott, by the way, who has been a little hit and miss lately, but it's to be expected. When it comes to directors from the 70s, you gotta think the only two really that still have it are probably Scorsese and Ridley Scott. As spotty as his last decade has been when it comes to his films, there are some really good ones in there. Unlike other filmmakers like Coppola hasn't directed anything in a while. Spielberg has been more miss than hit lately, in my opinion. Lucas retired. De Palma, haven't seen anything from De Palma in a while. So when it comes to 70s directors, only ones left standing are probably Ridley Scott and Martin Scorsese. So whenever there's a Ridley Scott movie in theaters, go watch it, folks, because the guy's getting up there in age. God knows how many movies he's got left in his back pocket. But as far as the recent movies that I liked from him, I really enjoyed Prometheus. Unlike most people, I thought Prometheus was a lot of fun. I really liked All the Money in the World. I thought that was a great movie. And as far as the movies that I didn't like as much, I thought The Martian was okay. Nothing special, just okay. I thought it was a little overhyped. Other movies lately that he's directed, Alien Covenant was a bit of a misfire. So there are some duds in there. There's some hits and some misses. This one is definitely a hit, in my opinion, and it's probably the best Ridley Scott movie that he's directed in quite a while. I'd have to look back at his filmography to see what specific movie compares to this one. But I thought this was an excellent movie. I went to see this in the theater with a friend, and he enjoyed it thoroughly as well, because there's not much action in this movie. The action is concentrated at the beginning. When we're introduced to Matt Damon's character, there's a huge battle going on. So it's at the beginning and at the very end, hence the name The Last Duel. But you're just so invested in these characters in here. So addressing the whole controversy about the rape, it's part of the story. And when you look at this movie has a very feminist message to it. Every time that we change perspective, you get a title card, the truth according to Jacques. And then you get a title card, the truth according to X character. And when it comes to the female character, and it's getting to her turn to tell the story about the rape, it says the truth according to the female character. I forget her name, but then the title fades out, and all what's left is the truth. which is a little on the nose in my opinion, but a lot of audience members, especially those who are protesting on the internet, clearly didn't get that message in the film. Other than that, the whole message of the film is that you have Adam Driver's character and Matt Damon's character, and they're all full of greed and hate and insecurity, and the one voice of reason in this movie is the female character. When the male characters are away on battle, the female character is left in charge of the kingdom, and she's actually taking care of her people instead of just going to war, waging war with random people for their individual pride and glory. That's the message of the movie. The message of the movie is also that the rape, it comes to the woman. It's not up to the man to avenge. It's up to the woman's feelings. Like, we have to focus on how the woman feels. It's not Matt Damon's time to become a huge prideful avenger or whatever. That's the message of the movie. So people probably found out that this movie was about a rape, and they heard the word rape and they're like, rape, yikes, and they started protesting on the internet for this movie. It was a really decently told story, and it's something that I always complain about in movies. I always complain that movies, when they want to get political, they tend to get very topical, and the problem is movies are not a good medium for topical storytelling, because by the time you write the movie, produce the movie, release the movie, your movie is going to be outdated. But this is a very feminist movie, has very hashtag Me Too kind of themes to it, but it's done very subtly, very effectively, and you can show this movie to an audience member in 20 years. Whoops, I knocked my microphone, sorry. Hopefully that wasn't loud on you guys. But you can show this movie in 20 years to some random audience member, and that audience member would enjoy it equally as well, without necessarily understanding the political landscape at the time of this movie's release. The whole cast in this is fabulous. Adam Driver is really good in this movie, and he's going to be in another Ridley Scott movie later this year, House of Gucci, which I'm very excited for, especially after watching this movie. The one miscast, I would say, in this movie, the female actress, I forget her name, and I feel kind of bad, but she was in Free Guy, and I liked her in that movie as well, and she was great in this movie. The one miscast here I felt was Matt Damon, because Matt Damon's character is supposed to be this big, brute-like warrior that's very prideful, and I don't really see that in Matt Damon. Matt Damon is one of those people, like a Leo DiCaprio, where whenever I see him in a movie, I kind of just see a little kid. That might be just a personal thing, but I wish they kind of went with almost like a Tom Hardy kind of person, just like someone who's more brute-like, just so it can fit the character a little better. I don't really see Matt Damon as this tough warrior who enters battle and kills 20 people. And then there's Ben Affleck in this movie, and Ben Affleck is very good in this movie, but he's basically playing himself, right? He doesn't really try to do a medieval type accent, and he plays this guy where all he does is get drunk and have orgies with women. So I'm sure there wasn't much acting on not Matt Damon. I'm sure there wasn't much acting on Ben Affleck's behalf here. Very natural performance for him. Yikes! All right. So The Last Duel, very decent movie. I don't even like medieval movies, to be honest. It's something I don't like. Medieval times kind of give me a little anxiety. Everything about it, the way they dance, the music that's like I don't know, it just gives me the creeps. And I usually don't like medieval type of movies, like Shakespeare movies and stuff like that. But I feel like the fact that this movie had a very relevant story to it kept me hooked for long enough. And the fact that none of these characters are really portrayed as quote unquote the bad guy. Everyone kind of had their perspective, and there are some faults in some people's perspectives, but you kind of root for the character whenever they're telling their point of view on the story. And it really rides that fine line really well. It shows that rape scene, and it's very uneasy to watch, and I kind of had to look away when that rape scene was being shown. but it was somewhat, I'm not, the only word that comes to mind is tasteful, but it's not really the right word. It was well done because the rape was done through the perspective of Adam Driver. And when you watch it as an audience member, you're kind of disgusted by this act, but you can also kind of sort of understand Adam Driver's point of view. And then when it's retold through the point of view of the woman, obviously it's tragic and disgusting, and you have zero sympathy for Adam Driver's character. So overall, I love this movie. I think it's going to land on my top 10 movies of the year, but it's hard to tell because a year like this, you're kind of getting the 2020 catalog as well. A lot of movies got pushed because of the pandemic, so we'll wait and see. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. Go watch it because it's currently bombing at the box office. All right. What's the second movie I watched? The second movie I watched was Antlers. Antlers tells the story of a child, and his father is a meth lab scientist. I don't know if that's the... What do you call a person who makes meth? A meth dealer? Not really a dealer. He's making the meth. A meth scientist. A cook. There we go. Sorry, I'm really bad with words today. He's a meth cook. I haven't been watching enough Breaking Bad, obviously. So yeah, the father is a meth cook, and he gets kind of possessed by this elk, like a werewolf, but an elk. And it's about this boy kind of taking care of his family as they're going through this disturbing transformation. Meanwhile, the story is told through the perspective of his teacher, who notices that something's wrong with this kid, only to find out that there's some strange occurrences happening in their house. This movie's been getting kind of mixed reviews, but I wanted to check it out for myself because it seemed interesting in its premise, and I'm a little mixed on the movie. I do like the themes and questions that this movie brings, especially for a horror movie, which is usually a genre where it's, give the kiddos a couple of jump scares and they'll be on their way. This movie tries to do something a little more deep, showing child abuse as a central theme of this movie, and the main character has gone through some abuse of her own. So the parallels there I thought were pretty interesting, and that whole story was interesting. The child performance in this, very good in this movie, and if a child performance is bad, I won't get points off of the movie because it's hard to get a kid to act. But I thought the child performance in this was really good, even by adult standards. I thought he was great in this movie. Jesse Plemons is also in this movie. He plays a police officer that's kind of watching after his sister, who's the teacher in this. And I love Jesse Plemons. I think he's a great actor. And I especially love his wife, because I had a crush on his wife before he was married to her, because I watched Spider-Man as a child. All right, that's enough of that. But anyway, this movie was a mixed bag when it came to its horror, surprisingly enough. I liked its drama more than the horror itself. The main problem I had was the use of CG in this, which should be a minor problem, but just kept taking me out of the movie. When you watch a movie like The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, that is, or when you're watching An American Werewolf in London, and you see that body transformation, you're just like, yuck! And I never really got this in this movie, despite there being some attempts at a gruesome transformation. It's a neat premise, you know? We've seen movies where people transform into werewolves, and The Thing, and even Kevin Smith tried to make a movie where a guy turns into a walrus, and here we have a movie where a man turns into an elk. And for some reason, I wasn't all that disturbed by it. I thought the creature just didn't frighten me, and I wish it did use more practical effects. And a lot of critics are gonna be like, oh, it's 2021, just get used to it, but I'm not gonna get used to it. If you're gonna take the lazy way, I'm gonna call it out. To me, it's lazy if you have CG, and there are parts where the CG is merited, and there are parts where it wasn't merited, especially when it comes to the gore, like a stabbing scene involving the monster's antlers piercing through an individual, and then the CG blood flies everywhere. It doesn't really disturb me. It kind of looks like a PlayStation video game to me. That was the main problem I had with it. Had the creature design really been terrifying, something like an American Werewolf in London, or just that the design itself was more interesting. I'm even thinking of the movie Krampus. I remember the movie Krampus when that came out. That used a lot of practical effects, at least enough for me to get invested in the film, and that final design of Krampus was very interesting. I thought the design of the monster in this was kind of plain, kind of flat, especially when you have such a cool premise like a were-deer. That could have been really cool. It doesn't really do much with it. And ultimately, I also think that the movie just didn't know how to end, and ends the same way as every horror movie, where it's like you think the heroes are in the clear, but turns out, no, they're not. Cut to black. Which is like kind of the same thing as... Only movie that comes to mind right now is the original Nightmare on Elm Street with Johnny Depp, where you think they're in the clear, they hop into the convertible, and the convertible just collapses and drives away with them. I hate that ending. It just reeks of, I don't know, whoa, spooky, maybe a sequel. Yeah. Ultimately, I feel like the drama works in here. Usually it's the opposite, you watch a movie like The Conjuring and it's like, all the characters are kind of stupid and it's kind of boring, but hey, here's some jump scares. But this is kind of the opposite. I felt like all the scares were ineffective, and I felt like all the drama was pretty effective, and I thought the performances in here were pretty good. So that was my bone to pick with that movie, with Antlers. Ultimately, I thought that if you're going to pick one of the two, obviously watch Last Duel. I'm going to watch The Last Night in Soho this week, as well as The French Dispatch. I'm doing a movie catch-up, and all the movies right now in theaters are pretty good. I'm probably going to skip on The Eternals. Kind of looks boring to me. Yeah, it kind of looks... Here's my review of Eternals. If you like Marvel movies, go watch Eternals. If you're sick of Marvel movies, don't watch Eternals. Don't be one of those people like, oh, another Marvel movie, and go watch it. Defeats the whole purpose. So many good movies in theaters right now. Go watch something else. But yeah, so I'll get back to you guys when it comes to The French Dispatch and to Last Night in Soho. What is the mystery movie I want to recommend you guys? This movie came out in 2008, I believe. And it's an Israeli film, an Israeli documentary, and I believe it was nominated for an Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. This movie is called Waltz with Bashir. So basically this movie is about your main character, and this is a documentary. This is all real, by the way, despite it being animated. So the main character went to war in Beirut. Basically, Israelis went to Beirut in order to find Palestinian terrorists, and to compare it to an American war, it would be similar to the Vietnam War, where it's this very traumatic war, kind of takes place in jungles and stuff like that, or a lot of vegetation, that is. So that's the context of the movie. You have your main character who really blocked out everything from this war, and he finds himself now much older. This war was in 1982. This movie's release was in 2008. So he finds himself much older and realizes that he doesn't remember anything from the war. And he goes to a shrink, and the shrink tells him, oh, it's because when you witness something extremely traumatic, it's almost like you're watching it through a movie or through the lens of someone else, and it's kind of like you dissociate from the events. So it's basically this character going to his platoon mates, going to the people who were in the same war, and asking for their story so that he can slowly reconstruct some of the memories of his own. And I usually don't gravitate towards war movies because they're kind of just heavy for me. But to me, this isn't really a war movie. Yes, it's a war movie, but it's more of a movie about trauma and about more of the psychological effects of war. There's some beautiful imagery going on in this, by the way. The whole film is animated, and it helps bring that theme of trauma relevant, that whole dissociation between a traumatic event and the way you remember it. This movie is animated to help emphasize that whole dilemma going on, and it really works in this. The animation is very plain. It's 2D animation. It's cell. What do they call that? Rotoscope. There we go. Basically, the characters are filmed beforehand, and then there's animation added on top of the characters. So it kind of has this realistic movement to it, but it feels very cartoonish. It looks like almost like a visual comic book. That's how it looked like to me. I thought the look of this movie was really interesting, and the director of this knows exactly when to exaggerate scenes in this. There's like a scene that comes to mind where a character is kind of just hallucinating, and you see this big naked woman floating on the ocean, and he's floating on top of her. He knows when to go ultra realistic, and he knows when to take it back and let the ambiguous and the metaphysical kind of take over. But then I'm gonna spoil the movie, so cut to the just go watch the movie if you haven't seen it. But my favorite film critic is Mark Kermode at BBC. And I think he's the best film critic because he actually comprehends film and talks about film. And when I heard him talk about this movie, he loved this movie. So did I. The only complaint he had with it was that at the end of this movie, they showed real footage. It goes from animation to showing real footage. And he didn't really like that. He thought that the animation spoke for itself, that the animation was traumatic in its own way, and stuff like that. And my rebuttal would kind of be, the whole movie you're kind of in the brain of this main character where he's dissociating himself from the war. And as he slowly builds the stories up, as he listens to other people's tale, he suddenly gets a more clear image of what happened in the war. So it kind of fits along the theme of that theme. And then when you see the real events at the end, it's such a fucking gut punch. And what they show is not really like graphic. It's not like gore. Like I remember when the movie Hacksaw Ridge came out, and I felt like it just felt a little too exploitive. Kind of felt like Django Unchained to me, to be quite honest. And then people are like, "Oh, but that's what war really feels like." And I'm like, I understand, like, if you were looking at a war, that's what it looks like. But to me, this captures the feeling of dread of war, just with that ending, the shots they chose at the end. I thought, like, the whole movie, I can't believe I've never seen this movie until just recently. But, guys, if you haven't seen Waltz with Bashir, also pick it up on Blu-ray, because it's such a visually beautiful movie. And if you don't know much about Middle Eastern conflicts, don't worry. That's not really what this movie is about. That's kind of just almost like a backdrop. It's more about how people deal with trauma. That's what this movie is about to me. Highly recommend it. I love this movie. It's probably the best movie I've seen in a long time, which is why I wanted to talk about it on this channel, or in this video, rather. I'm losing my ability to speak. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you watched The Last Duel and or Waltz with Bashir, and I'll catch you later.